The station floated above the cold world below, where no birds flew, and no trees grew, only ice, and dead wind moved across the surface, and above it all, the great metal ring turned slowly in the dark sky of space, holding life from many small training room deep inside the station. A human boy named Connor trained alone, his arms pushed against the weights, his feet slammed the floor again and again. Sweat ran down his face, but his eyes stayed hard and clear. He was not big, but he moved like fire, fast, sharp, and focused. Behind a vent cover in the wall, a pair of golden eyes watched him. They did not blink. They did not move. They only watched. The girl, who owned those eyes, pressed her hand to the cold metal and followed every step he took. Her name was Vayli, and she was not human. Her skin was silver and soft. Her hair was like black smoke, and her ears pointed back like a blade. She was still young in her people's eyes, still unproven, still waiting for her first trial, but she wanted to be seen, not by her elders, not by her trainers, not even by her proud mother, who never smiled. She wanted one thing: to be seen by him, the human boy who never looked afraid. Connor trained every night, even when the others rested, and Vayli came every night, even when her own muscles screamed. She copied his moves in secret. When he left, she stayed and tried to repeat what he had done. Sometimes she fell hard, sometimes she bled, but she never cried. One night she stood in the middle of the room just after he left. Her hands shook a little. Her breath was fast. She looked at the mirror and saw herself small, thin, weak. She turned away and punched the wall. Not hard enough, not yet. The next day something strange happened. Connor finished early and walked out of the training room, but he stopped and looked back. He heard a sound like breath held too long. He moved closer and called out, "Hello, anyone?" There Vayli stepped out from the shadows. She felt her heart race. Her hands felt too big. Her voice caught, but she forced herself to speak. "I saw you train. I tried to learn," she said. Her voice low. Connor tilted his head, then smiled, not a mocking smile. "Just a kind one," he said. "That's brave. Most people just watch from far away." "I'm not a child anymore," Vayli said, fast too fast, and her cheeks turned darker in color. "I am almost old enough for trials. I can fight too." Connor's smile grew a little. He said, "I believe you," and then turned to go. Before she could say more, she stood frozen in place. Her chest felt tight, her fingers curled, and she wanted to say wait, or don't go, or something more, but no words came, and the moment passed. The next morning she was gone, her room empty, her scent faded. The others whispered she had been taken home, cold to the deep moons for special training, or maybe punishment. No one knew. Connor felt something strange, like a small stone in his chest. Not pain, not sorrow, just a weight he could not name. He thought about her words and her eyes and how serious she had looked. Years passed and wars came. The station changed, and so did he. Now he stood in the hall of the great warship as a soldier. No longer a boy, his face marked by battle, his voice steady, his hands firm. But sometimes, at night, he still thought of that silver girl who called herself strong. And then it happened. During a meeting of leaders, a door opened, and in stepped a tall figure in dark armor, sharp like a blade, and silent as death. The room went still. The warrior walked with calm steps, but everyone felt the heat of power around her. She wore no clan mark, no name, only a mask of metal, with glowing lines. Connor stared at her. Something deep inside stirred, not fear, not hate, just a strange pull, a memory without a face. The masked warrior looked at him for only a second, but in that second her head tilted just so, and her hand flexed, just slightly. She turned and walked away as if nothing had passed, but Connor stood still, heart beating faster, not sure why, but sure of one thing: he had seen those eyes before. And somewhere in the quiet part of his mind, a voice whispered her name, Valiant. He did not know if it was truth or dream, but he could not forget it now, not ever again. The ship that carried her left the stars behind and sank into the cold dark of the outer moons, where no light reached, and no song was ever sung. Her people called it the place of silence, where young ones were made into warriors or broken into dust, and Vayli was sent there not as a child but as one who dared to speak before proving herself. She stepped onto the black soil, where bones of old beasts rested half buried in frozen ash, and the air cut the skin like glass. She did not flinch, she did not cry, she only stood tall. As the elders watched her from above, she wore no armor, only soft cloth that offered no warmth, and carried no weapon, only her bare hands, and the fire in her heart. The trials began with no warning, and no kindness. She was thrown into a pit with a beast 3 times her size, its mouth wide with metal teeth and breath that burned like steam. She dodged its charge, barely, her feet sliding, her breath catching, but she moved with memory, the memory of a human boy who never gave up, who moved like fire. She thought of him as she fought, and she survived. The beast fell, but so did part of her old self. They gave her no rest, not in body, not in spirit. She was made to climb walls that tore her hands to shreds, to walk naked through storms of dust, and smoke to fight shadows with nothing but her will, and every night she sat alone, staring at a small piece of paper hidden in her boot, a paper with a drawing she had made long ago of a boy with steady eyes and a small smile. One night an elder came to her, a woman with silver hair and no mouth, just black threads where lips once lived. She looked at Veli and said nothing, only threw down a spear and pointed to the horizon where a fire burned. Veli stood, took the spear, and walked without a word for 3 days. She crossed jagged cliffs, fought cold winds, and faced beasts that fed on fear. But she reached the fire, and there she found a mirror, not a mirror of glass, but of stone, polished smooth by centuries of blood. It showed her not her face, but the truth inside her. It showed her the girl she used to be, hiding behind walls, watching from vents, afraid to speak. It showed her the warrior she was becoming, not perfect, not whole, but real and strong and ready. She returned to the camp covered in ash, her skin marked, her arms cut, but her eyes calm and clear. The elders looked at her and nodded. One of them stepped forward and spoke. Your old name is gone, your child's face is broken. You are now Carinth, warrior without chain, soul without fear. From that day she wore armor forged in the caves below. The moon's black and sharp like obsidian, with glowing lines across the chest that pulsed with her breath. She did not smile, she did not speak, she did not look back. She buried the name Veli deep inside, and wore the mask of Carinth with honor, but she still kept the drawing folded inside a small case tied to her belt, hidden from all eyes, but close to her heart. And when the wind howled and the sky turned red, she would hold it for a moment, before battle, remembering the one who saw her, before she became the blazes past and war spread across the stars. Enemies rose with new machines and deadly storms, and the humans called for help from old allies and new warriors answered the call. Carinth was among them, silent, cold, feared by all, yet trusted by those who fought beside her. One mission led her to the edge of a dying world, where ruins spoke of battles long past, and shadows moved with hunger. And there, on a flickering screen, in a human outpost, she saw him, Connor, the human boy, now a man, standing alone against a wave of enemy drones, firing with both hands, yelling orders, holding the line, while others fell. Her hand touched the screen, and something moved inside her, not pain, not sorrow, but a call, a pull, a memory like fire. She turned away from the others and walked into her ship, giving no words and no reason, but one thought filled her mind like thunder. It is time. And the stars opened before her once more as she flew toward the place where the past waited, where a promise still burned, where a boy with fire in his heart fought again. And this time she would not watch from the shadows, she would fight beside him, not as a girl but as the warrior she had become. The sky above the helix front burned red from distant battles, while the warship, named Horizon's Edge, floated silent like a beast, watching its prey inside the steel halls. Soldiers moved with heavy steps, faces hard, voices quiet. They had lost many in the last clash, and hope was wearing thin. But that day something new stepped off the landing deck. She walked in without a word, her armor black and sharp with faint lines of violet that moved like light beneath her skin. A long cloak trailed behind her, cut and frayed from past battles. Her boots hit the floor without sound, and her helmet hid her face, but her presence filled the air like thunder before a storm. The human officers looked at her with uneasy eyes. They had heard stories, whispers from other fronts, of a silent alien warrior who turned tides alone, who did not speak, did not eat, did not sleep, but always won, always came back, soaked in the blood of machines and beasts alike. She gave no name, only a code, Carinth, and when asked who sent her, she said nothing, only showed the mark burned into her gauntlet, a symbol known to a few, but feared by all, the mark of the deep moons, the place where warriors were born. In silence and pain, Connor stood near the back, watching her from the shadows. Without knowing why, he felt his breath catch, his heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something older, something lost. Her movements looked too familiar, like echoes. In the dark, she turned once, scanning the room, and her gaze passed over him, not stopping, not slowing. But in that moment, he saw her hand flex just a little, her fingers curling, then relaxing, and something deep inside him whispered her name. They assigned her to his squad, though no one dared ask why. The higher command seemed almost nervous around her, like even they did not want to say no during their first mission together. She moved like fire and shadow, never missing a strike, never needing cover. When a beast charged the line, she leapt over it and drove her blade through its skull before it could blink. The other soldiers stared in silence. Connor stared too, but not just in awe. Something about her made his chest feel tight like a dream. Trying to wake later that night in the quiet of the barracks, he found her sitting alone near the window, watching the stars. Her helmet still on, her sword across her knees. He stepped closer and said, "Thank you for today. You saved my life." She did. Not answered, did not turn, but nodded once. Slow and careful he sat down near her, not too close, not too far, and tried again. Your moves, they remind me of someone I used to know a long time ago, back on the station near Voss Prime. She was young, tried hard, always in the shadows. He gave a soft laugh, said I never got to say goodbye still. She did not speak, but her head tilted just slightly, and her fingers touched something on her belt. A small case made of old alloy, something personal, something worn by time. Connor leaned back, staring at the ceiling above, thinking maybe he was wrong, maybe just tired, maybe seeing ghosts where there were none, but something still pulled at him. That night he could not sleep, his dreams full of silver eyes, and soft voices, and a name he had not said in years. The next day the enemy struck without warning, drones with flesh metal wings and poison clouds. They hit hard, fast, and with strange tactics. The squad scattered, and Connor found himself pinned under broken steel, his leg twisted, pain sharp in his side. He called for help, but the coms were dead, and the smoke grew thicker, and then she was there like a ghost, stepping through the flames, her sword cutting through the wreckage, her hands pulling him free. She lifted him onto her shoulder with ease, and carried him through fire, her armor burning, but she never slowed, never stumbled. They made it to shelter, a broken dome, half buried in ash. She set him down gently, and crouched beside him, checking his wounds, her fingers, careful, her breath slow. Connor looked up at her, his voice shaking, said, "Who are you really? I've seen your moves, your silence. I know you don't speak, but I need to know." He reached into his jacket, pulled out something old and worn, a small paper folded many times over, and handed it to her. She took it with steady hands, unfolded it slowly, and stared at the drawing inside, a simple sketch of a girl with soft hair and shy eyes standing behind a vent, watching a boy train. From afar, her hand trembled just once, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper. Then without a word, she stood, turned her back, and walked to the edge of the dome where the stars blinked above. And in that moment, he knew he had not seen a ghost. He had seen a promise kept across time and fire and silence, and she was still watching him, but not from the shadows anymore. The stars outside the broken dome blinked cold and distant, as if watching a secret unfold inside that dome. The human soldier named Connor sat quiet, his leg wrapped in field bandage, his breath shallow from pain, but his eyes were locked on the figure standing by the shattered wall, the masked alien warrior who had just saved his life again and again. Without speaking, without flinching, she still held the old paper drawing in her hand, fingers tight around the edges as if it could vanish. If she let go, the lines of her armor glowed dim like fading fire, and her body stood stiff as stone. But something was different now. Something in the air between them cracked, not with words, but with weight. Connor pushed himself to stand against the pain, every step toward her slow and shaking, but firm. He stopped just behind her, and said, "I drew that when I was just a kid, thought no one ever saw it, thought she was gone forever." He paused, then added, "I knew you looked familiar, the way you moved, the way you stood, like her, always watching, always quiet." For a long moment, the masked warrior said nothing, only stared at the paper in her hand. Then, slowly, with a breath so soft it could barely be heard, she reached up to her helmet. Her fingers brushed the sides, found the hidden release, and with a hiss of sealed air, the mask came free. Connor's breath caught as he looked into her face, not just a warrior's face, not just alien, not just sharp and scarred, but familiar eyes of gold hair like black smoked cheeks that once blushed in fear, now marked with thin lines of battle. Veli's name left his lips before he could stop it, her real name, the one she buried long ago. She looked at him, her voice low but clear, shaped by silence and flame. "I wanted you to see I could be strong, not just a girl hiding in vents, not just a child with dreams." Connor's eyes softened. He took a step closer, said, "I saw you back then more than you know. You didn't need to prove anything, but I did," she said fast, her voice shaking. "Not to you, to me. I ran because I felt small. I trained until my body broke, because I feared I would never be enough. I wore the mask so no one could see the girl underneath." She looked down at the drawing again, her voice growing distant. "This was the only thing that stayed with me through everything. Through trials, through pain, through blood and dust. I remembered your smile, and I fought to become someone who could stand beside it." Connor reached out and touched her arm. Gently, not as a soldier, not as an ally, but as someone who remembered, as someone who had waited, even without knowing it to already do. He said, "You always did." The silence between them held, not empty, but full, like a storm ready to burst, and maybe it would have, if not for the sudden roar of alarms and red lights filling the dome. A voice crackled through the come, "Enemy forces, moving fast, closing in from the eastern ridge. All units report." Veli turned, her face hardening again, but not cold. Her eyes locked on Connor's, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Not a wide smile, not a victory smile, just a quiet one, full of fire and truth. "Can you fight?" she asked. "I can limp and shoot," he said, grinning. Good, she answered, and picked up her sword from the ground, the glow along its edge, returning like breath to As they stepped outside into the red dust storm. The sound of machines rose in the distance, flying low with burning wings ready to tear the land apart, but they did not run. They stood together side by side, a human and an alien, a boy and a girl, now both warriors. The others saw them and paused, not sure what they were seeing. A masked blade from the silent moons standing beside a human soldier, smiling like an old friend. Connor raised his rifle. Vayli raised her blade, and together they moved into the storm, not as strangers, not as shadows, but as something new, something that had waited years to return, not to impress but to stand together. And the wind carried her name again, Valino, longer hidden, no longer a Frita. Storm hit without warning, a scream of wind and red dust tearing across the ruined field. The sky turned black with metal wings. Enemy drones circled like vultures, their eyes glowing with cold fire, scanning every shadow, hunting every heartbeat. The earth shook with the march of machines, and in the middle of that storm stood two figures. Connor gripped his rifle, though his leg throbbed with every breath. His armor cracked, his hands scraped and raw, but he stood tall, his back straight, his eyes locked on the shapes closing in and beside him. Vayli stood like a statue made of light and stone, her blade humming low and deadly, the lines on her armor pulsing with quiet rage. She did not speak, she did not flinch, she waited like a storm inside a storm. Her eyes fixed on the first wave of metal beasts, charging across the ash. Then they came. The first machine leaped through the air, its claws spread, its mouth open with plasma fire, and Vayli moved like thunder. Her blade rose, her body spun, the air split with heat and sparks. The machine fell in pieces. Connor shot the second in the head before it reached her, then dropped to one knee and aimed again, calling targets. Left, right, behind her. She heard him. She adjusted her stance, covering his side without a word. They moved like they had trained together for years. One fire, one wind, one blade, one shield. Metal beasts fell around them, broken, smoking, their bodies crashing into the ash with no screams, no blood, only silence after violence. But they were Tamanya. Drone exploded near Connor, throwing him off his feet. His rifle flew from his hands, and he hit the ground hard. Coughing blood, Vayli turned, saw him down, saw the next drone coming, saw the spike cannon rising. She ran. No time for thought, no time for fear, only motion, only heat, only the memory of a vent and a drawing, and a boy who once smiled at her. Without asking anything, she slammed into the drone blade, first tearing it open, and fire spilled across her shoulder. Her armor cracked, but she stayed standing over him, panting, hard eyes, glowing fists clenched around her blade. Connor tried to sit up, but she pushed him back down, one hand on his chest. Stay down, she said, her voice sharp like steel. I've got you. And all the drone landed behind him. She turned before it moved, split it in half in one breath. Her blood now dripping from her arm, but she did not stop. They fought for minutes that felt like days. Their bodies moved by pain and memory and rage, until the last machine fell, smoking and twitching in the dust stand. Then silence only. The wind remained, only their breath, loud inside broken helmets. Only the sky above them cracked with fire and fading. Red Vayli dropped to one knee beside Connor, her breath slow, her shoulders heavy. She looked at him, her voice low. Are you still alive? Human, barely, he said, smiling through the pain. You still standing, she said, but not for long. He touched her hand weakly, and said, you didn't have to come back. Famesh looked at him for a long moment and said, I never left. He frowned, confused, and she said more gently, I was always near you, in training, in thought, in battle. I became Karenth, to be strong, but Vayli never stopped watching you, not even in the darkest places. Connor laughed once, soft and tired, and said, you're insane, you know that. She nodded slowly. Maybe I am, but you are worth it. And then she slumped beside him, not unconscious, not broken, just tired, just quiet, and the wind blew over them like a minutes. Later, the sky cracked again, but this time not with drones. A rescue ship hovered above them, its lights cutting through the red dust, and soldiers dropped ropes and stretchers and pulled them out of the ashas. The medics worked. Connor refused to let go of her hand, and she refused to let go of the drawing still clutched in her other fist hand. As the ship rose into the stars, leaving the battlefield behind, two names were whispered. Among the soldiers, Connor, the stubborn fire, Vayli, the blade of silence. And together, they were something more, something legend, something that would not be forgotten, even if the stars went dark again. The medship flew quiet through the dark, its engines low, its lights soft, but inside the quiet, there was tension under every breath. The crew whispered the name Karanth, not with respect but with fear and wonder. They had heard of her, but now they had seen her scarred and silent, with human blood on her armor and a human hand in hers. Vayli sat on the edge of a steel bench, her eyes closed, her wounds patched but not healed. She felt no pain, not anymore, only a slow fire deep in her chest. Not from battle, not from blood, but from what she had learned before the mission, from the message hidden in her clan's war order. It was never a rescue, it was a test. They had sent her into the fire, not to help the humans, but to see if she would break, if she would bend, if she would betray the cold path of the silent moons. By protecting something as weak and warm as a human, they watched me like prey, she whispered to herself. They wanted to see if I would fall back into Valley. Connor limped into the medbay, leaning on a crutch, his side wrapped tight, his voice hoarse from smoke. He saw her sitting there unmoving, and said, "They patched me up, gave me a nice scar and a protein bar, then told me not to touch anything." Sharp, she looked up, but said nothing. He sat beside her, wincing with each movement, then held out something, a small box, silver and smooth. The drawing she had dropped during the fight, now clean, folded carefully. "You forgot this," he said quietly, "or maybe you didn't." She took it, her fingers brushing his, and said, "Thank you, but..." There was no smile on her face, only that storm in her eyes. Connor watched her for a moment, then asked, "What aren't you telling?" Mesh turned to him slowly and said, "They knew the ambush would come. They sent me to see what I would choose. You or the blade." His face went still, his jaw tight. "You mean your people?" She nodded. "Yes, my clan, my elders. The Council of Fire and Void. They told me it was a simple support mission, but it was a trial, in secret." Connor shook his head, his voice sharp. "They used you as bait, and me as a tessessa," she said, and her voice did not tremble. "What are you going to do about it?" he asked. "I'm going to make them answer," she said, and stood, her armor clicking into place when the ship landed on the command station. Above Ura's edge, she did not rest, did not wait. She walked straight to the Hall of Voices, where her clan's council sat in high chairs above glowing stone, with warriors on each side. Silent and cold, Connor followed behind, limping but refusing to be left out. She stepped into the light, removed her helmet, and stared at the elders, her voice like steel covered in fire. "You watched me bleed, you watched me choose, you judged me without speaking, and now I judge you." One elder leaned forward, his eyes dull. "Your emotions have returned, your weakness has surfaced again." She did not blink, and said, "If standing for a life is weakness, then I am weaker than all of you, and stronger than any." The hall shifted, quiet whispers, sharp glances, but no one moved. Then she turned, pointed to Connor, and said, "He is clan-bound to me." Now the room froze. Connor blinked. "Wait, what?" She looked at him with the faintest smile. "You stood beside me in fire. That makes you more than an ally. That makes you brother to my name." The warriors stirred, some in shock, some in anger, some in quiet. "Oh, no human has ever been named clan-bound by a silent moon warrior. Not in 100 cycles, not since the War of Stars and Ash." The High Elder stood, his voice like dry ice. "You challenge our law with this claim?" Vayli stepped forward, her sword drawn, but not raised. "I do not challenge your law, I follow its truth. I faced the trial. I chose my path, and I declare my bond with fire and breath. If that is exile, then I will walk alone. If it is death, then I will not bow. But if it is honor, then you must bow to it." A long pause followed, and then the elder sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your path is your own, warrior, but the fire you carry may now burn us, or then let it burn," she said, and turned her back without fear. Connor followed her out, his voice low. "What does clan-bound even mean?" She looked at him and said, "It means I will protect you until my last breath, and it means you are never alone again." Before he could speak, alarms flared across the station, and the sky outside turned black. With ships not theirs, not known, a new fleet had arrived, and the true enemy was here, not just to test them, but to end everything they stood forth. Sky above the station turned black as oil, the stars vanished behind massive shapes, engines burned red in silence, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Ships, unlike any they had seen, hovered in perfect rows. Not with speed, not with fire, but with patience. Ancient patience, like something older than war, older than empires. Inside the command center, humans and aliens scrambled side by side. Alerts screamed across screens, officers shouted orders. Vayli stood still in the middle of it all, armor humming, her blade resting against her shoulder, her eyes locked on the approaching enemy. Not in fear, not in doubt, but in knowing. She had seen those ships before, once long ago, buried in the ice during a solo trial on the Forgotten Moon. A glimpse of a craft, half dead, half alive, and something inside it still breathing, something ancient and wrong. Connor stood beside her, helmet in one hand, rifle in the other, his wounds still fresh, but his voice steady when he spoke. "Tell me, that's not what I think it is." "It is," she said, "and nothing more. The council wanted proof of my loyalty," she added. "They will now see the cost of their doubts." The enemy moved like fog, slow, steady, pulling light into itself. Drones poured out from the bellies of the great ships, not like the ones before. These had no heat, no sound, no metal, only black glass shaped Like bones and wings, Vayli turned to Connor and said, "This is not their war, it never was. The humans they fight are not their enemy. The Council will never admit it, but they are afraid, and now we have no time left for pride, so what do we do?" he asked. "Softly we fight," she answered, and then she turned and walked to the center platform where the Council members gathered in fear. She did not kneel, did not bow. She raised her blade and drove it into the floor. The sound rang across the hall like thunder. "You failed to see the true danger," she said. "You tested me while the enemy watched. You played with power, while death waited. Now you will listen, or you will fall." One elder rose in anger. "You overstep, warrior. You are one voice." She stepped closer, then shouted, "I am the only voice that stood when the storm came, and I will not watch this station burn while you argue over titles." Connor stepped beside her rifle, raised not at them, but at the ceiling where the enemy's signal now echoed through the steel. "I don't care about your ranks or your rules," he said. "I care about who survives." The youngest warrior in the room stepped forward. Armor still bright face, still full of questions, and said, "What do we die?" Vayli turned to him slowly and said, "We unite, no human, no alien, just warriors. We take ships, we gather those who still breathe, and we strike at their core, where they hide their light. We break them not for honor, not for glory, but for tomorrow." And somehow the hall grew silent again, not with fear this time, but with something else, something older, something waiting. Moments later, ships launched not just from the station, but from forgotten bays and silent allies. Outcasts, rogues, half-broken mechs, anything that could move, anything that could fight. At the front flew two ships side by side, Connor in one, Vayli in the other, their voices linked through private comm. She spoke first. "You ready always?" she said, and this time her voice smiled. They flew into the heart of the dark fleet, dodging blasts, weaving through black storms. Drones followed, but fell in pairs, each one marked by Connor's fire, or Valley's blade. She cut through space itself. Using moves born from pain and training in dreams, they reached the core, a giant structure pulsing like a heart with no body. Ancient signals rippled from it, like waves drowning weaker ships before they could fire. But Vayli flew straight into it, her ship spinning, her blade charged with the core energy, while Connor laid down cover fire, shouting for her to pull back. She ignored him and slammed into the core with full force, her ship exploding in light. The structure cracked, screaming like metal torn from time. Connor shouted her name over the radio, but got no answer, only static and smoke. Then, from the ruin of the core, a shadow leapt, a figure burning with light, not metal, not cloth, just her armor, her body. Her blade. She landed on his ship, clung to the top, and looked down through the glass, her eyes glowing, her breath steady. She was alive. And he laughed like a boy again. Together, they returned, not to cheers, not to medals, but to silence, a silence full of author. Enemy was gone. The sky was clear again, but nothing felt the same. Vayli stood before the survivors and said, "No more masks, no more shadows. We are one now, if we choose to be." Connor stood beside her, said, "The future begins when we stop being strangers." And in that moment, no one saw a human and an alien. They saw the fire and the blade. They saw hope in the shape of two warriors who refused to let the stars die in silence. They saw what it meant to fight, not to impress, but to stand together to the very end.